why don't we talk about the Hoosiers?
Yeah, let's move on to some of these game previews. Week 13, as you said, my gosh, time has flown. We're going to make picks here against the spread as well. And let's start off with the Hoosiers, the number 5 team in the country. They are making a trip to Columbus, Ohio, to take on the Buckeyes. Ohio State favored by 13.5 points. Woof. Okay, so
big line.
It is a big line. A little bit of news here. Ohio State center Seth McLaughlin sustained Achilles injury during practice on Tuesday, is expected to be out the rest of the season. This is a big deal because Ohio State's offensive line has already had to do a lot of shuffling. Josh Simmons, the left tackle, who has been mocked in the first round in some of these mock drafts, he got hurt against Oregon. They've been able to kind of cobble it together. I think the first game back against Nebraska was not good. Since then, they've played much better as a unit, but just you ask the question how much more they can sustain in terms of injuries on that offensive front.
Yeah, and I mean, it's an Indiana team that will be curious to see if they can take advantage of that, right? Like we've talked a lot about Indiana being very sound on both sides of the ball. Where they had issues against Michigan the first time that they went up against dudes that are going to play on Sundays was Michigan's defensive front and their offensive line. So now we're talking about the reverse of this. It's been an interesting week because I feel like not a lot of people have actually talked about the game and how these teams match up. It's more just been this idea of Indiana being a big underdog and that like Indiana's schedule. Well, the meat of the schedule is here. Like this is the game. This is what's going to define their season. Give me a key. Like how would Indiana either potentially pull off a win or at least keep it close? Because I think we're all in agreement that a close loss keeps them, maybe decently positioned for the CFP.
Yeah, I'm looking at 2 things there for Indiana. The first thing is what they can do to affect Ohio State's offensive front. Indiana leads the Big Ten right now in sacks and tackles for loss. This is a very disruptive front. They do a great job of affecting the quarterback through one-on-one matchups. They also do a great job of using scheme to create havoc on the front. And so I think that is a way that they can find an edge in the game. Where Ohio State has struggled in games, they haven't run the ball particularly well. Second half of that Oregon game against Nebraska, they didn't run it well. So I think that's going to have to be Indiana's job number 1, is to create havoc and use their front that's played well all year long to do so. The flip side, I look at Indiana's offense. We talk about Curtis Rourke as a guy who should have a ticket to New York. He is a very good quarterback, and he throws it to some receivers that are difference makers. And it's not just one guy or 2 guys. They have 6 players on that roster that catch at least 2 balls a game. They've got wide receivers that range from 6'2" to guys that are 5'9", a little bit shifty, but can still play big. And Ohio State secondary, they've got a corner named Denzel Burke, who I think is a great player, who is very inconsistent. The ball can go over his head. It's happened numerous times this season. They got another corner named Davison Igbinosun, who likes to grab a lot. And if you can isolate him one-on-one and just kind of throw the jump ball, you might be able to move the football down the field with penalties. So those would be the 2 keys in the game for Indiana: a disruptive defensive front and the wide receiver quarterback connection against Ohio State secondary.
I think that Indiana can cover because this is a big line.
Yes.
It is also at the shoe. And, Indiana has been spending an entire season hearing about how great Indiana is and what a great story they are. Ryan Day's teams have kind of crushed some of the upstarts in the Big Ten when they're non-traditional powers. But he, again, we've talked about this over the course of this season, has struggled in games against top 5 teams. This is technically a top 5 showdown because Indiana is in that threshold.
Not technically. It is a top 5 showdown.
Okay, it is. I'm just saying there are people who don't believe that Indiana, has actually deserved it. But again, it'll be interesting to see how this one goes. I think Indiana will be prepared. I think they will be sound. I don't think they'll beat themselves. They will be playing so many more talented players than they have in a single game this season. But give me Indiana to cover and keep it close. Keep it interesting because Ohio State starts the game slow. And Indiana believes that they can do this, that they can beat anybody. They can crush any opponent, but certainly that they can hang in this game. So I think Ohio State wins, but I think Indiana covers.
I'm there with you. I love that you brought it up. This is one of the most well-coached teams I've watched all year long. They're not going to do things to hurt themselves. I don't think going on the road is a situation where you have to worry about the environment. Are they going to be locked in? Like, I don't think they care. Kurt Cignetti essentially said, we don't care. We're ready for this. And I believe him when he says stuff like that. I think this game is close into the fourth quarter. I'm going to say that Indiana covers as well. Ohio State ends up winning. I do also think this is one of those situations where you might get a backdoor cover where Ryan Day tries to score a touchdown late in the game if they're in range to do so. So the scoreboard looks a little bit better than maybe what the game flow actually said about it. But